Sometimes life changes in the blink of an eye, in a single moment so unexpected that everything that follows is forever altered. For Alina, it was meant to be just another evening. The streets were quiet, her thoughts consumed by the endless worries of her life. Bills piling up, her grandfather's fragile health, and the exhaustion of carrying responsibilities too heavy for her young shoulders. She was simply walking, lost in thought, when fate decided to intervene. A car came speeding around the corner, headlights blinding, danger closing in too fast for her to react. In that split second, she was powerless, frozen between fear and fate. But then, out of nowhere, someone stepped forward. Ethan Blake was not supposed to be there. A man of wealth, reputation, and untouchable status, his life was worlds apart from hers. Yet in that instant, none of that mattered. He moved without hesitation, throwing himself into harm's way, pulling her out of the path of destruction. The sound of screeching tires, the chaos of that moment, it could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it became the beginning of something neither of them had imagined. Ethan, a man who had lived a life cushioned by privilege, chose instinctively to risk it all for a woman he didn't even know. And Alina, who had spent years believing she was invisible, suddenly realized she mattered enough for someone to save. That moment carried a weight far beyond what either of them could have understood then. For Ethan, it stripped away the layers of pride and power that had defined him for so long. When he looked into Alina's frightened eyes, he saw something more important than wealth, more urgent than status. He saw humanity in its purest form, fragile, fleeting, and worth protecting. For Alina, the act shattered her belief that life only ever took from her, that no one would ever step forward when she was in danger. In Ethan's sacrifice, she saw a truth she had long forgotten. Sometimes, even in a cruel world, there are hearts willing to give without asking anything in return. The power of that single act was not in its drama, but in its meaning. Ethan could have walked away, let the moment pass, remained the untouchable millionaire the world knew him to be. But he didn't. He chose to step into risk, to value a stranger's life over his own safety, and in doing so, he unknowingly tied his story to Alina's. It was a bond forged not in wealth, not in attraction, but in courage, a bond that destiny itself seemed to demand. Moments like these remind us that the turning points in life are rarely grand speeches or carefully laid plans. They are the seconds when instinct takes over, when the heart moves faster than the mind, when a choice is made that cannot be undone. For Ethan and Alina, that evening was not just a close call with danger. It was the moment that changed everything. A rescue, a sacrifice, a spark of connection born in chaos. It was the beginning of a story where two lives, so different yet destined to intertwine, began to rewrite each other's fate. When two worlds collide, the impact is never gentle. Ethan Blake had built his life on luxury, surrounded by glass towers, polished marble floors, and the quiet hum of influence that followed him everywhere he went. His was a world where problems disappeared with the stroke of a pen, where money smoothed over every rough edge, and where people looked at him with either admiration or envy. Alina's world could not have been more different. She lived in the shadows of struggle, where each day was a test of endurance, where dreams were delayed because survival demanded priority, and where she carried the weight of her grandfather's failing health on her weary shoulders. By every measure, they should have remained strangers, their lives running on parallel tracks that never touched. But fate has a way of disregarding boundaries. That night when Ethan pulled Alina from danger, their worlds did not just meet, they clashed. For Ethan, who had spent years believing that nothing could shake him, the encounter was a crack in his carefully controlled reality. Here was a woman who had nothing he valued in his usual circles, no fortune, no status, no connections. and yet she occupied his thoughts in a way no one else had before. For Elena, who had long grown used to being invisible, the sudden presence of this powerful man was overwhelming, almost unreal. Why would someone like him risk everything for someone like her? That question lingered, carving a space in her heart that no struggle could fill. At first, the differences between them felt like walls. Ethan's arrogance surfaced in the way he tried to offer help, assuming money was the cure for every hardship. Elena resisted, her pride unwilling to accept charity, her spirit determined to protect her dignity. Their conversations were laced with tension, his world of abundance clashing against her world of scarcity. Yet, beneath the friction was a spark neither of them could ignore. For in their differences, they began to see truths about themselves. Ethan realized that all his wealth had made him blind to what truly mattered. Elena began to see that not all power was cold or selfish. Sometimes it carried the capacity for sacrifice. Collisions are often destructive, but sometimes they are the only way to create something new. Ethan and Elena's meeting was not smooth, not easy, but it was transformative. Each challenged the other's beliefs. Each forced the other to look beyond the comfort of their world. And as uncomfortable as it was, they both began to change. Ethan's pride softened as he faced the reality that his riches could not solve everything. Elena's guarded heart slowly opened as she recognized that even the powerful can feel lost and in need of connection. In the end, when two worlds collide, the question is not whether they will break, but whether they will rebuild. Ethan and Elena discovered that the collision was not an accident but a design. Fate had brought together wealth and struggle, pride and humility, strength and vulnerability, not to destroy, but to teach, to heal, and to transform. Their worlds would never be the same, but perhaps that was the point. Sometimes, it takes the clash of opposites to create a story worth remembering. There is a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It is the loneliness of being unseen, of carrying battles so quietly that the world forgets you are even fighting. For years, Elena lived in that silence. To most people, she was just another face in the crowd, a waitress serving tables, a young woman too busy with her grandfather's illness to dream about her own future. People passed her by without noticing the exhaustion in her eyes, without realizing the weight she carried every single day. She had grown used to invisibility, to the idea that her life mattered only to the one person she cared for at home. But all of that began to change the day Ethan Blake entered her story. Ethan, for all his wealth and pride, had been equally blind in his own way. Surrounded by people who praised him, served him, or feared him, he was used to being admired for his fortune, not for his soul. The relationships in his world were transactional, alliances built on gain, conversations fueled by pretense. Yet when he looked at Elena, something shifted. She did not look at him with the awe he was accustomed to. She did not see his money or his reputation first. She saw him, the man, not the mask. And in that rare moment, Ethan felt exposed, almost vulnerable, as though someone had finally looked past the armor he had worn for so long. For Elena, being seen by Ethan was both shocking and disarming. She had never expected a man of his stature to notice her at all, let alone value her presence. But Ethan did not just see her. He acknowledged her strength, her sacrifices, her quiet resilience. He saw the woman who woke up every day to fight battles no one else recognized. The woman who held her dignity close even when life gave her every reason to let go. In his eyes, Elena was no longer invisible. She was extraordinary, and for someone who had lived so long in the shadows, that recognition was life-changing. There is power in being seen. It is not about compliments or flattery. It is about being recognized for who you truly are. Ethan's gaze reminded Elena that she was more than her struggles, more than her poverty, more than her exhaustion. She was a person worth protecting, worth cherishing, worth loving. And in turn, Elena's gaze gave Ethan something he had been missing all his life: humanity. For the first time, he felt like more than his fortune, more than his reputation. She saw the cracks in his pride, the wariness behind his confidence, and she accepted him as he was. That exchange of sight became the beginning of healing for them both. Ethan, the man who had everything, discovered that being truly seen was the one gift his money could never buy. Elena, the woman who had nothing, found strength in knowing that her soul had been noticed by someone who could have ignored her but chose not to. In each other's eyes, they found not judgment but recognition. And in that recognition, they discovered the kind of connection that changes not just how you are seen, but how you see yourself. Love is the one treasure the world cannot buy, no matter how deep the pockets or how high the fortune. Ethan Blake had lived a life where money solved almost every problem. If someone was sick, he could afford the best doctors. If a door was closed, his wealth opened it. If people doubted him, his reputation silenced them. But when he met Elena, he came face to face with a truth he had never truly known. Love cannot be purchased, bargained for, or controlled. It must be given freely, and it must be received with an open heart. Ethan's first instinct was to give Elena the only thing he knew how to give: wealth. He offered help, comfort, and security, believing those things would win her trust. But Elena was not impressed by glittering promises or expensive gestures. She had lived her life in struggle, and her strength came not from what she had, but from what she endured. To her, love was not about what someone could provide, but about how someone chose to stand beside her when life grew heavy. Ethan's fortune could buy her comfort, but what she longed for was something his money had never been able to offer anyone: his heart. As their bond grew, Ethan began to see what she valued most. It wasn't the grand gestures, but the quiet moments. It was not the diamonds he could place in her hands, but the way he held her hand when fear crept in. It was not the lavish dinners, but the way he sat with her in silence, listening when her heart was too tired for words. For a man who had always believed his value was tied to his fortune, this realization was humbling. Elena loved him not for his empire, but for his humanity. She loved the man behind the wealth, the man who had risked his life for her when she was a stranger. And that kind of love could not be bought. It had to be earned through truth, sacrifice, and presence. For Elena, love beyond wealth meant safety that had nothing to do with walls of luxury. It meant knowing that even when her world felt fragile, there was someone who would not abandon her. It meant that for once in her life, she did not have to fight her battles alone. Ethan gave her more than protection. He gave her the freedom to lean on someone without fear of judgment. And in return, she gave him something even greater: purpose. She reminded him that his worth was not measured in assets, but in the way he could give his heart honestly. Together, they proved a simple but profound truth. Love is the greatest cure because it reaches where wealth cannot. It heals wounds no medicine touches, calms fears no money silences, and fills emptiness no success can satisfy. For Ethan and Elena, love was not built on conditions, bargains, or gifts. It was built on trust, sacrifice, and the courage to let themselves be vulnerable. And in the end, that love became the treasure both had been searching for. Priceless, enduring, and greater than anything the world could offer. A legacy is not measured by the fortune we accumulate, nor by the titles we wear, nor even by the admiration of strangers. Those things may shine brightly for a moment, but they fade with time, replaced by new faces and louder voices. True legacy lives in the quiet places, in the lives we touch, the sacrifices we make, and the love we leave behind. For Ethan Blake, this truth was one he had never considered. His name carried weight in the business world, his wealth gave him influence, and his status made him untouchable. yet none of it mattered the day he chose to risk his life for a stranger. In that moment, his legacy was rewritten, not by power or pride, but by love. Elena had lived a life far removed from Ethan's world of grandeur. She had no fortune to her name, no status to shield her. What she did have was resilience, compassion, and an unshakable spirit. When fate brought their worlds together, her strength became the mirror that forced Ethan to see himself clearly for the first time. He realized that all the money he had amassed, all the recognition he had earned, would mean nothing if it was not anchored in something deeper. Through Elena, he discovered that true greatness was not about how much you could hold, but about how much you were willing to give. Their love became more than companionship. It became a legacy in itself. Ethan, once defined by arrogance, learned humility. He began to see that the most profound victories were not in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the moments when he put someone else's needs before his own. Elena, once defined by struggle, discovered that her story could inspire strength in others. Together, they built something that reached beyond their own lives. They created an example, a story that would remind others that love has the power to heal, to transform, and to endure. Legacies are often misunderstood. People think they are built through achievements that echo in history books or fortunes that outlive their owners. But Ethan and Elena's story showed a different truth. Their legacy was not about wealth or fame. It was about courage, the courage to risk, the courage to love, the courage to change. Ethan's act of saving a stranger became more than a single moment of heroism. It became the foundation of a lifetime defined by compassion. Elena's resilience became more than quiet survival. It became a light that illuminated the strength hidden in every heart that dared to keep loving despite hardship. And so, their legacy was not one that faded with time, but one that grew with every retelling of their story. Ethan Blake would not be remembered only as a millionaire, nor Elena only as a woman who struggled. They would be remembered as two souls who met at the intersection of fate and choice, who built a life that proved love is the only treasure worth leaving behind. Because when all else is gone, when wealth has vanished and titles are forgotten, what endures is love. That is the legacy that outlives us all.